My name is Kylie Bergfalk. I've just finished an arts degree here at the University of Waterloo. I'm a joint honors in political science and history with a specialization in international relations and global governance. I wanted to go on exchange because I wanted to travel. I wanted the experience of living abroad. And university is a good time to do that. It's also sort of a unique time, a unique way to experience a country in a foreign educational system. So I was excited about that. I'm not entirely sure why I chose Turkey in particular. It was a bit of a whim. It's a bit off the beaten track. As a student of political science and history, Istanbul is a really interesting city to be in. There's a lot of history there. It's formerly Constantinople. And as a political science student, it's fascinating to be living in the Middle East. More than that, though, I think I've just been fascinated with Turkey and Istanbul for a couple of years. I read a book called Snow by the Turkish author Orhan Pamuk a couple of years ago, and ironically, it's not set in Istanbul at all. It's actually in the far east of the country in a town called Kars, which means snow in Turkish. And I think ever since I read that, it just sort of captured my imagination. So when I had the option to go to Turkey, when I decided to study abroad, it ended up being the one that I chose. So I actually transferred to the University of Waterloo from another school in Manitoba before my third year of university. And so I had wanted to study abroad, but I had already used all my transfer credits in my degree here at the University of Waterloo. So I didn't think for a long time, I didn't think I would be able to study abroad because of my transfer credits. But I really wanted to. And as graduation drew near, I realized I didn't want to graduate yet. So I thought studying abroad would be a good way to sort of push back that date. So I came in and I talked to Robert, and it turned out that I could sort of delete or erase some of the transfer credits I already had and replace them with transfer credits from my exchange term. Setting is very different. Istanbul is very different from Waterloo, from KW, from any city in Canada. It's a crowded city, it's a big city. Yeditepe is located on the Asian side of the city, about 40 minutes from the neighborhood of Kadıköy, which is sort of one of the central Istanbul neighborhoods on the Asian side. 40-minute bus ride, it's not quite so long by car. And Yeditepe itself is situated right on the edge of this enormous military reserve. The land for the school was given by the military, and the school isn't a military school, but it, I think, has similar political alignments. Security is quite high on campus at Yeditepe, but also at other universities in Turkey and in malls as well. They have occasionally Kurdish terrorism attacks, so there's metal detectors almost everywhere you go. Another difference on the Yeditepe campus is the buildings themselves are more beautiful than Waterloo, although that's not a very high bar. And there are dogs on campus. There's just a whole bunch of dogs running around. And while I was there was a couple sets of puppies as well that students play with. But I think they just kind of live on campus and the campus guards feed them. So two challenges really stand out in my mind from my experience there. The first is the language, the linguistic barrier. Fewer people speak English in Istanbul than I anticipated, which makes sense and is fine. But I arrived in Istanbul knowing absolutely no Turkish at all. So it was quite overwhelming. And the city is huge and the public transportation is different. It's a mixture of public and private. And to get anywhere, you really have to, well, you need to ask for directions. So that was a challenge initially. That said, it was really neat to kind of watch myself pick up the language over as the months went by. I didn't learn a lot of Turkish. I don't speak Turkish by any stretch of the imagination, but by the end of my time there, I was able to get around very easily and understand billboards and that sort of thing without consciously trying. You just sort of pick it up, so that was neat. The second challenge that was most difficult for me, I think, over the time there was that street harassment is a problem in Istanbul, in Turkey, especially as a foreign woman. You stand out a bit, and different treatment is typical. There's staring, leering, catcalling, and even on occasion physical sexual harassment in crowded public transportation situations or that sort of thing. That's a scary experience. You feel very vulnerable. But there are ways to protect yourself. Stand with your back against a wall or against a woman. Learn a couple of words in Turkish, make a big deal. The Turkish people don't approve of that behavior either. But that's something to be aware of as a challenge if you're going to be living in Istanbul or in Turkey. So I really enjoyed the courses that I took at Yeditepe. I had a fairly light load. I took a Turkish language course. I took a history course on the history of diplomacy in the Ottoman Empire. I took a Turkish foreign policy course, and I took an issues in Turkish politics course. Two of those courses, the Turkish politics and the Turkish language course, were mainly exchange students and Erasmus students, foreign students in those courses. The other two, foreign policy and Ottoman diplomacy, had a lot of majority Turkish students in the class, which is an interesting distinction because there was really a contrast between how much English was spoken in the courses that were mostly foreigners and the courses that were mostly Turkish. One thing that was frustrating for a lot of us at first, but that you get used to, is that the level of English among the student body is impressive, but not as high as native speakers. So the level of instruction is much lower than we were accustomed to. And the Turkish students were often very reluctant to engage in class, in debate, even at the teacher's prompting. And sometimes even the teachers would go off for 15 minutes speaking in Turkish, trying to explain a concept to the Turkish students who would not understand it in English. The strengths is that the professors that I had were really great, and they all spoke English very well. It was sort of the classes that required more Turkish speaking. And the professors were good in terms of the subject matter and the teaching, and also just personally. I felt really welcomed and supported by the professors. They really wanted to share Istanbul with us. One of my professors, my history professor, met up with me on a Friday and took me on a bit of a tour around the old city, and she took me to the Ottoman archives to show me around. Yeah, they were really great. A lot of them are educated in the West as well, so in that sense, they're highly qualified to do what they do. It wasn't bad. It was roughly, a lot of things were comparable to Canada. Rent, if you lived in the dorms, was about the same, probably about $600 a month. I chose to live off campus because in the dorm you don't have access to a kitchen, and I really wanted to experience Turkish food in a hands-on, tactile kind of way. So I chose to live off campus, and it was cheaper to do that. I paid about half the price of the dorms. Maybe not quite, 2/3 living off campus. Food, eating out is about the same. The fast food options are a lot more interesting. They're different than Canada. In the grocery stores, food is quite cheap. Produce is cheap. It is more expensive to get around and takes longer to get around, but that's because your student card doesn't get you onto the buses for free. So it's cheaper if you're paying $3 for GRT transit. And alcohol is comparable prices or more. So Turkish cuisine was actually a really exciting discovery for me in Turkey. I had no idea that Turkish food was the cuisine that it is. Like it stands alone. It's not really like any other any food that I've had. The two dishes that I am proficient at making that I really enjoyed making are, one is called mercimek köfte. Köfte, and pardon my Turkish, köfte is basically a meatball. And so there's a lot of different kinds of meatballs, but mercimek means red lentils. So mercimek köfte is this red lentil dish that you make on the stove, and then you hand roll the ball, and then you serve it with lettuce, and you squeeze some lemon on it and some fresh parsley. And that's fun to make because it's very hands-on food. Well, speaking of mercimek, there's mercimek çorba, which is soup, another delicious thing. They also have a Turkish drinking culture that is associated with food. So the Turkish alcohol, national alcohol, I suppose, or the typical alcohol is called rakı, and it's an aniseed or licorice flavored alcohol, kind of like ouzo from Greece or sambuca from Italy. And they cut it with water, and they eat it or drink it with a table spread with what's called meze, which is a bit like Spanish tapas, but it's all Turkish dishes. It's a lot of eggplant spreads. It's dolma, which are grape leaves filled with meat or rice and spices. A lot of red pepper dishes, spicy green peppers, and they just sit for hours talking and drinking and eating, and it's a pretty cool, pretty fun activity. Keyif, pleasure, I think, is the rough translation, and you draw it out as long as possible is sort of the point. Turkey is known, of course, for doner, for its meat dishes, and that's readily available on the street. And the desserts in Turkey are something else as well. They put sugar syrup on almost everything. Baklava is delicious there, but there's a whole variety of other baklava-like dishes that you can partake in. The other ritual that I really enjoyed was Turkish coffee. And Turkish coffee is different from the coffee we drink here. You leave the grounds in the cup, so it's a gritty experience if you're not prepared for it. They always serve it with a sweet and a glass of water in case you swallow some grounds. And one of the fun aspects of Turkish coffee is that, like the rakı and the meze, it's very much a social occasion. So when you drink Turkish coffee with a friend, at the end of it, you might tell each other's fortunes in the coffee grounds, which is sort of, it's fun. A Turkish friend of mine, told me that the origins of that tradition come from the Ottoman harem. They outlawed gossip, and they said that the concubines were not allowed to gossip anymore. And so to get around that rule, they started telling each other's fortunes from the coffee grounds in their cups. That is a big question. I only just got back a month ago, but it's good. It's good. It's a good question to think about. I think for me, living in Turkey was not my first time living abroad, not my first time in a foreign language context, although that's always startling. But it certainly confirmed sort of my sense of independence and my confidence in myself that I did it. I lived in this foreign language context for that long, and I fed myself and got around and dealt with this foreign bureaucracy. So it's really good in that sense, in terms of helping me think bigger about what is possible for my life. As a student, studying in Turkey was a really valuable experience. Studying political science and history, as I said, Istanbul is a very interesting place to be. And I felt like living in Turkey, I got a lot of insight into into the Middle East, especially studying Turkish foreign policy. It was really interesting to study some of the Middle Eastern issues that I've seen in courses here in Waterloo from a completely different perspective, from not quite an inside perspective, but certainly not a Western one. So exchanges in general, and for me this was invaluable in terms of helping me understand where other people are coming from, and putting myself in their shoes, I suppose, as cliche as that sounds. Yeah, definitely. And I would say definitely go to Turkey in the future for an exchange. You'll learn a lot regardless. You'll learn a lot being there. You'll especially learn a lot living there. And the other appeal of Turkey is that it is kind of unusual. People don't do that, go to Turkey. Even among the Erasmus students, the European students that I met studying in Istanbul were there because it was sort of the exotic thing to do. And one neat thing that happens with that is that all of the people that you meet there are kind of really interesting people who want to be in interesting places. So if you're an interesting person who wants to be in an interesting place, Istanbul is definitely a good choice.